All right, it's enforcing the peace. It's Major Neill Franklin. Neill, thanks so much for doing these.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure, Seth.
I can see you're there in front of Baltimore, and this one is a focus on calming the violence.
Absolutely. And perfect place to be when we're talking about violence, unfortunately.
Yeah, and so, since we're roughly at the very end of the year here in 2019. So just give us a sense of, remind us about the state of play there in Baltimore and maybe how we find some solutions.
Yeah. So we just brought on a new police commissioner, Mike Harrison from New Orleans, to lead the Baltimore Police Department. And yes, a police department is critical, a critical piece of the problem solving for decreasing violence in any city or enhancing public safety. But we have to remember that the police department is just a small piece of the overall picture. What's really important are the social dynamics of a particular city or community, that will improve public safety. Other jobs, economic empowerment, education, health. So many things come into play regarding the foundation of a community, which is absolutely critical. And I say the foundational health of a community as it relates to public safety. And so, again, the police department is just a small piece of that. Another major factor in the level of violence within any community is how we're approaching our health issue of drugs, right? And drug use, drug addiction. And law enforcement cannot be the tip of that spear. So here in Baltimore, we're headed to over 300 murders. Right now, I think we're around 260 something, and it's just the beginning of September. And I think this will be like the fourth year of over 300 murders recently. Now, we only have 620,000 people in Baltimore, so that's the significance of that number. And the foundation of it is the drug trade, the illicit drug trade, the selling of drugs on corners, the fighting over market share of these corners. And then once you have an act of violence in competition for a corner, a street corner, and controlling that corner, then you have usually months of retaliation between these gangs and these crews. So that's the foundation of what we're dealing with regarding the violence in Baltimore. And let me wrap it up with this. We just had a recent announcement, unfortunately, by law enforcement here in Baltimore, being spearheaded by the Drug Enforcement Administration, unfortunately, that they have put together a strike force that's going to deal with the people, the gangs and the crews that are behind the selling of these drugs in Baltimore City. And they name the drugs like heroin, obviously, fentanyl, cocaine, and marijuana. Okay, this is a time when this country is moving away from the prohibition of marijuana, but yet this strike force is going to focus on marijuana. It makes no sense to me. The other thing about this strike force that was said is that it's not temporary. It said it's permanent. That's a problem. That's a real problem. So that's my opening statement regarding the violence that we're experiencing here in Baltimore and the foundation of it and what the response currently is.
How can you calm the violence if you are meeting violence with violence? Of course, we're rooting for the good guys. There's no question about that. But I know if I raise the stakes in an argument, just to personalize it and make it simple with my girlfriend, fiance, maybe even wife, I lost the argument the minute that I raised the ceiling, on where we were going with the emotion. So so that's number one. Number two is naming marijuana in a state that is moving towards legalization.
Absolutely.
To-
We're looking for it to be on the ballot for a year from now in 2020, so that we the citizens can vote it out, can end prohibition of marijuana here in the state of Maryland.
Does that, is this going to be, in your mind, do you see this as an acute example of when Maryland does vote in legalization, that, once we do get the regulations in place, that is absolutely going to stem the tide of violence and give us a whole new reality that we never knew in that city?
Well, I think it will be a significant part of stemming the violence when we get there, but it's not going to be immediate, because it's going to take time for these illegal marketplaces to eventually fade out, right? Once people have to get used to the new playbook, right? They have to get used to the new paradigm of accessing marijuana here in the state of Maryland, like they did in other states, and even states like Colorado and Washington State, who've now been at it for years. People also need to understand that it's not the entire state. For instance, in Colorado, where you have access to legal marijuana, it's only a few jurisdictions that have opened up so far. So it's going to take time for it to move across the entire state, and then from state to state, so that you don't have people crossing borders just so they can have legal access to marijuana. They should have legal access where they live. So it's going to take time for that to happen. But it will be a significant part of it. The bottom line is, if you want to stem the violence, again, which is primarily revolves around the illicit drug trade, you got to take the money out of it. And the only way you can take the money out of it is to regulate it. It's to regulate it. Yeah, you put in proper protocols, age, time, and use restrictions and guidelines and policies and whatever. But adults have to have some form of regulated legal access to all of this. If not, we're going to continue to be this dog chasing its tail, because here we go again in Baltimore with policies that continue to fail. Another strike force. Look, if you want to know how well it works, these strike forces and this type of exaggerated enforcement, ask El Chapo, right? He may be behind bars, but his organization, which is probably now split into 2 or 3, is running faster and harder than ever, selling illegal drugs.
When
right?
we talked about him last time, you brought up when we can kind of recreate economies in, especially, and specifically Latin America, when we were speaking about that, you're giving another opportunity to somebody that would have to kind of exist in that realm.
Absolutely.
What are some of the tricks that you've seen along the way here on kind of fast tracking a more positive economy in general? Because that's what you started out with, was when we've got a nice, a nice moving economy, we have to worry about these things less. What are your thoughts on that?
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's true. When you're able to, but see, it's not just providing jobs for people. The jobs have to be sustainable, right? It can't be jobs where I got to go out and get 4 or 5 of these jobs because they don't pay well, right? And it even begins ahead of that, because, for instance, in a city like Baltimore, where we still need electricians, we still need plumbers. Now, these are great paying jobs, right? These trades. We still need automobile technicians, especially as these cars become more and more advanced. right? And there's a whole HVAC folks, because who wants to be without their air conditioning as we deal with climate change, right? But my point is this: we don't have the trade schools anymore. Everybody is not going to go to college, right? How about having a school, high schools like we used to, where you can learn a trade, come out of high school, and get a really good job in one of these trades? So it's even something as simple as that. So the jobs have to be there. They have to be sustainable jobs. They have to pay well to, how can I say, attract people away from the illicit drug trade. But even with that, because we have introduced so many people into our, and when I say people, I'm really talking about our young people, right? We have introduced so many of them into our criminal justice system that they're not, number one, they haven't been in school. They would have to go back to school to learn the trade, but then again, saddled with these criminal convictions for, say, selling drugs. They're not going to get a job as a tradesman. They'll be locked out.
All these things start to intersect, because you and I talked about mass incarceration before, on this forum. And so all of these things start to intersect. And I think your first point is the point that I'm taking away from here, which is law enforcement is only one tool here. It's only one tool. And yes, of course, it depends how we use it. And unfortunately, lately, we're making some old mistakes here in the home city, the beautiful city behind you.
Law enforcement's only one tool, and we're supposed to be the caboose of the train, right? Not in the middle, not in the front, at the end. We're supposed to be the caboose to be there to, okay, for those people who weren't able to, for whatever reason, take advantage of the opportunities that we're talking about, be it a trade, be it going on to higher levels of education, college, or whatever it takes to stay out of the illicit drug trade and off the corners. Law enforcement are the ones that come at the end to kind of like deal with that. And hopefully, if you do things right in your community, in your city, in your neighborhood, those numbers of people that remain on the corners will be very, very small, and then manageable. And even when law enforcement comes along to latch on to them, no, it's not necessarily prison, right? It's like, all right, we got you in bracelets. However, we got this program over here. We got this opportunity for you over here if you're willing to take part in it. Before we, warehouse you in some institution in these places that we call correctional facilities that don't really correct anything.
Let's get you into an actual correctional facility. Let's turn it on a dime right now at this moment.
Absolutely. Yeah. And we would have the resources to do it, because we wouldn't be wasting, billions of dollars from coast to coast on our failed criminal justice system of just locking people up and throwing away the key.
We are going to get this sooner or later, right? You say law enforcement should be a lagging indicator. And taking your point, it seems like law enforcement is behaving as a lagging indicator in trying to be a leading indicator. So we'll keep talking. We'll keep working with you on this. And Neill, I really appreciate your time as always. These are great conversations. So I very much appreciate it. Can't wait for the next one.
Oh, me too, Seth. Thanks a lot for having me.